Several years ago, I conducted a funeral for a man I'd never met, although I was close to one of his family members. Unfortunately, Stanley, not his real name, had committed suicide. He'd gotten into money trouble. His wife had left him. His adult children, though at the funeral, thoroughly despised him. His problems were further complicated. I'm serious, true story. He had a lifelong affiliation with the mob. And to hear his family tell it, Stanley took his life just so the Chicago Mafia couldn't do it for him. Right before the service began, his brother, with a spot-on Tony Soprano voice inflection, encouraged me to, quote, not get too freaking religious, because religion wasn't Stanley's style. Then as the service began, another relative, a long-haired hippie type, told everyone gathered that his departed cousin had gone to some, ethereal wonder world, mythological paradise filled with harmony and bliss and unbridled sex and illicit drugs, the whole deal. And then, just before it was time for me to speak, they played a song. Evidently, it was Stanley's favorite song and the only request he made in his suicide note. Maybe you know this song. And now the end is near, so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear. I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've blown the key here. I've lived a life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway and more. Help me out. Much more than this. Come on. And as I sat there listening to that nonsense, and even though I was about to preach this man's funeral, I almost soiled myself trying not to laugh. I mean, come on. Never mind that Stanley's way was clearly a flawed, fatal way. Never mind that his way included criminal activities, running drugs and sex and who knows what else. Never mind that his whole family despised him. Never mind that his associates were about to put his sorry behind in long-term parking, if you get the reference. Never mind he did himself in so they couldn't do it for him. Nevertheless, Stanley wanted everybody to know, I did it my way. Okay. I hate that song. And although I do hear it a lot, did you know that I Did It My Way is the second most requested song for funerals? And it's really just an updated take on a poem by William Ernest Henley, written about 120 years ago. It matters not how straight the gate, how charted with punishment the scrolls. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. But here's what I find so maddening. Most of us believe that malarkey. I can chart my own course? Really? Your life is your life and you're living it your way? Are you serious? There's just one problem with you thinking that you are in charge of you. One day you're going to die, and you don't get a vote. Henley is dead, some captain. Old Blue Eyes, he's dead. And I take no joy in asking, but I wonder what song Sinatra is singing now. We're about to launch into a new series called New Mercies. And we're going to start with one of the most quotable quotes in all the Bible. And not just among believers. You can find this reference in Ecclesiastes 3, in music, and other popular culture. And here's just an appetizer. You want to turn and find it. Ecclesiastes 3, here's verse 1. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity in heaven, under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. Now, that's some pretty heavy stuff if you think it through, because what Solomon is saying is all of the seasons of all of your life that we all have to go through, there is a reason. There's a purpose. Your life is not just a chaotic mess. Things that have happened to you are not happenstance. Every happening has a purpose. There is something vital that God has purposed for you in every activity of your life. So make no mistake, God is the one who determines that purpose and those activities. Therefore, you are not the master of your own fate, and I am not the captain of my own soul. Only God alone is. And no matter how confidently we may sing to the contrary, when that final curtain is drawn, the ultimate analysis of your life is not determined by, did I do it my way, but rather, did I do it God's way? Now, to fully appreciate that truth, we got to do some backgrounding. So before we read on in this passage, I want to show you a few other passages. Take, for example, Isaiah 46, a passage where God basically describes himself. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, and what is still to come. But here's what I want you to know. My purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. Basically, God is separating himself from every other being in creation. He's saying, I and I alone sit on top of time. I see the past, present, and future unfurled in panoramic view. Everything is seen by me and controlled by me. That's what he's saying. Now, if you were to ask me what my life is going to look like over the next few months, I could, with some degree of difficulty, or accuracy, tell you some of what I'll be doing. And I hope on that list, for example, is that I'm going to get a healthy kidney. And I hope that new kidney will mean no more dialysis, a lot more time with my grandkids. I've also been noodling about writing another book. I think there's another one in me. See, I can hope for those things and to some degree maybe plan for them, but I don't know whether those things are going to happen because unlike God, I am limited. But the God of Scripture, there is none like him. And it's because God sees all of our moments, even moments that haven't happened yet. Besides, his governing control over all the earth, it is so comprehensive. Our God can summon a bird of prey to go hunt over there instead of here. And the bird's got to go. But he commands more than birds. Even humans have to submit to his leadership. Did you know that God can actually summon from a far-off land a man to go fulfill his purpose over here in this land instead? For example, God can say, move to Phoenix, Wyatt. And Wyatt had to move to Phoenix. And whether it's a job transfer, a family illness, or some other circumstance that appears to prompt that move, God says, I'm the true story driving this story. I brought you here, Wyatt. No, Honeywell transferred me. No, who do you think is in charge of Honeywell? God sits on top of our world. He sees out and into forever, not in some fragmented, partial view. He sees it all, and he sees it all at the same time. And then he summons you and me to accomplish his purpose according to his predetermined will. Okay, wow. This is going to be fun. Moving on. Let's check out Acts 17, see what else God does. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man, that's Adam, he made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth. Now, a lot of people have trouble with that last line. They think, wait, hang on. If Adam gave birth to Cain, and then Cain had kids, and so on and so on and so on. How did we end up with all these skin colors and different languages if everybody descended from the same dude? Well, let me tell you. In Genesis chapter 11, the surviving inhabitants of earth got together after the flood, and they basically agreed that God could, if he wanted, flood the earth another time. So they said, we're going to pool our ingenuity and we're going to build a tower all the way to the sky. So if it ever floods again, we'll be all right. So they start building this tower in a little burg named Babel. But God stepped in, said, you people, you think you're something on a stick, but I'm going to show you who is really in charge. I'm going to confuse both your looks and your language by scattering you all over the face of the earth. And bam, in practically no time, humanity developed dramatically different skin tones based on climate and increasingly divergent dialects based on their location. And, by the way, since we're on the topic, up here, we're a little heavy on the pasty side of skin, right? Especially me. So please don't hear those words and think, oh, so that's where they came from. No, sorry, thank you for playing. That's where we came from. This world did not start out pasty, folks. Just setting the record straight. One more passage and we'll go to Ecclesiastes. From one man, Adam, God made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the times set for them, how long they would live, and the exact places where they should live. And he did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. In other words, our God sits above time, and his view spans all of eternity. He sees the end of a thing in the very instant he begins that thing. He never starts a project with any unanswered, lingering questions about how it's all going to turn out. And if God ever does ask a question, strap in, folks, because he's not asking hoping you will have the answer. He's asking because he knows that you never can know unless he tells you. This passage also means that 200 gazillion eons ago, all the way back in 1955, God knew even before Tom and Eleanor Wyatt decided to push their twin beds together so that they could commence conception of a little chunk of awesome handsomeness. He knew he was going to use me to birth 3 kids, amazing kids. He also knew that he would ultimately send me to the desert to start a new thing in a strange place. Point being, he knew. And he alone determines the times, and his purpose will stand. Truly, our God is colossal beyond measure. He knows everything. He knows everything at the macro level, meaning he knows where every star is located, the orbit of every planet in the solar system. He also knows the elevation of every peak and every mountain range. But God also knows everything at the micro level, every cell, every atom, every mitosis. He knows it all. He even knows every thought you think before you think it, every event you experience. And he knows that event at every level, from every possible perspective. And he knows how every event of your life flows into every other event and how each event flows back into past events. But he also knows other events that won't happen until well into eternity. And he doesn't get a headache about that. And I just got one telling you. Our God is such an awesomely cataclysmically amazing God. And yet, according to Jesus, if a little bird topples out of a tree, he sees it. And yet he's big enough to shout at the wind of the waves, "Stop!" And just like that, the water has to stop churning and the winds have to stop blowing. In that very moment, you may remember, it left his co-workers huddling on the other side of the boat, and they were totally freaked out. Who is he that commands even the wind and the waves? I'll tell you who he is. He is the all-knowing, all-controlling, ever-present, always sufficient, eternal throughout all the ages God. And because he is, there is no other like him. And the psalmist is right when he says he does whatever pleases him. Some preachers worry about sharing that verse, so they kind of dance around with intricate explanations so it'll sound a little easier. But let me tell you, according to the original text, what God meant to say was, I can do whatever I please. And that's the God of the Bible. Now, you can dress it up. You can invent your own God. You can emasculate God and strip him of every power that is not to your liking. But the God I serve, he stands above and beyond eternity. And his vision and power is without limit. All right. With that set of lenses, I think we're ready to look at Ecclesiastes 3. You ready? Oh, 7. Okay. Just understand the logical conclusion to God's outrageous claims. Because if it's true that he is in control of your life, guess what else is also true? You're not. A truth that if you think that's hard to swallow, just imagine how the great King Solomon must have felt. That dude was the king of the hill and the top of the heap in all 4 phases of man's greatest pursuits, because he achieved more with regard to wealth, pleasure, power, and wisdom, more than anyone. He was the big kahuna, without question. And yet, as he first approached and then watched as his middle years grew smaller and smaller in his rearview mirror, Solomon began wondering whether his life had been of any meaning at all. In fact, he concluded that it was, in fact, meaningless, just a chasing after the wind. Yeah, he'd known some good times, but those times had just kept rolling by, to the point that no matter how he tried, he just couldn't find satisfaction. And it was in one of his more philosophic and poetic moments that he wrote these words we're looking at today. There is a time, a God-ordained, pre-appointed time for everything. Please mark everything. I wonder, whatever could that word possibly mean? What do you think that includes? Yeah, how about everything? Not just some things, not even most things. Solomon says there is a divinely appointed time scheduled in the courts of heaven for everything I face. He said, I didn't get that before, but now I do. But he goes on, and a season, you can mark that word too, put them together, because everything and every season that comes into your life is a gift from God so that you can experience every activity under heaven. Now, when this passage was famously covered by the birds back in my day, they typically viewed this list as a bunch of stuff that typically occurs in life. And so what was the message? Turn, right? Turn, turn. That's not what this list is. This is not a list of stuff that happens. It is a list of stuff that God sends, because he sits above time and his purposes will stand. Therefore, everything that happens to you, it passes first through his sovereign hands. And that's why nobody, absolutely no one, can ever live life my way. Every life has to unfold his way. The circumstances we face, the heartaches we endure, the joys that we feel, the battles we fight, God sends them all. The trouble is, we live in a world where we don't believe that. We'll take parts of it. So wouldn't it be nice if we could approach this passage that very same way? Kind of like a smorgasbord where you take what you like and skip what you don't. Like, for example, a time to be born. Yeah, I'll take some of that. But a time to die? I'll pass. A time to plant? Sure. But a time to uproot? That kind of sounds painful. A time to kill? I mean, who hasn't considered that as an option? But also a time to heal. And I doubt I'm not the only one looking for that one. A time to tear down, which seems like all people ever do if you look at social media very much. And a time to build. Oh, baby, I'm a builder at heart. That's my time. Are you going where I'm trying to take you? If it was up to me, I would always choose laughing over weeping and dancing instead of mourning. And who doesn't agree that it's much more fun to scatter stones than it is to have to gather them? A time to embrace? Yeah, baby. But a time to refrain? Says who? A time to keep, which in Clarissa's mind is all the time. Love you, dear. And a time to throw away. I keep quoting that verse to her, but will she listen? She won't listen. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. I'm a preacher, so it's always time to speak. But see, we don't get to ignore anything on this list. Not even a time to love and a time to hate. A time for war, really, and a time for peace. Because our God inhabits eternity, and He alone has the perspective required to know exactly what I need in order to complete His work in me. You see, I'm too selfish. I'm too narrowly focused. I'm limited so that I cannot see my life nearly as clearly as God sees my life. And that's why, given the chance, I think I'd only pick the good stuff on this list and none of the other stuff. Stuff that might hurt me or sting me or stretch me. But here's the thing. God loves me too much to let me make that mistake. Let's face it, people that are never stretched or hurt typically turn out to be spoiled, rotten brats. They're vicious, angry, even bitter people. And so God sends this God who sits above eternity and who sees your entire life in a panorama. He alone decides to send to you whatever it is He decides to send. And then He hand delivers it. You remember the movie Dead Poets Society? Robin Williams is that unconventional professor determined to impart to his students a heart-throbbing passion for life. In one scene, he moves the whole class out to the trophy case and displays some of the most notable graduates of the school, people who had really made a name for themselves. And then he said, "Look into those faces. When they were here, the whole world was their oyster opened before them. But where are they now? They're fertilizing worms, that's what. I wonder, how many of those opportunities did they miss?" And then he quoted Thoreau, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." And then he shouted, what? "Carpe diem!" Which means, as we all learned from the movie, seize the day. Some of you need to go home and watch this movie. Now, when I first saw that movie and when I first heard that Carpe Diem, I nearly leaped out of my seat and shouted hallelujah, because that's me. I don't like waiting for life to happen to me. I want to happen to life. When I get up in the morning, my mind is already spinning, thinking of stuff I want to do. And I just know there are days when I completely wear Clarissa out with all of my spinning. Carpe diem, baby, that's my battle cry. But then I go to Ecclesiastes 3, and I realize real life isn't about me seizing the day. It's about my sovereign God making sure His day seizes me. What I mean by that is God He plans to bring to me everything he wants me to accomplish. So I can relax about that to-do list. And if God has indeed brought a particular thing into my way, then there will be enough time and enough energy and enough resources for me to get it done. And if God didn't send it my way, there won't be enough time, energy, or resources, no matter how I spin. You with me? And it's because my God is too smart to give me stuff I can't do. Ever since my kidneys died, I have adopted Acts 13, verse 36 as another of my life's verses. Listen to this. When David had served God's purpose in his generation, he fell asleep and was buried. I love that verse. You're going, you're weird. No, it's because what that verse tells me is, sick or not, God's going to keep me around until I fulfill every purpose he has for me. And only after every purpose is fulfilled, only then will I die. And until then, baby, I'm invincible, indestructible, safe in his arms. Is that cool to know or what? Just one thing, as I scan this list, I realize I can't schedule any of this stuff because it's not my job to decide how my life will play out. My only job is how am I going to respond to what God has decided about my life. And that's the rub, because sometimes I don't know whether it's time to speak or to be silent. Other times when I need to hold on to something, I really should let it go. And there are other times when I know the right thing to do, but how do I know when I should do it? And can anybody tell me anything good about dying? Anything at all? A little boy went to a symphony for the first time. Not surprisingly, the instrument that most intrigued him was the cymbal. Every time those cymbals crashed, that kid was awestruck. So he got to meet the cymbal player afterward, and he said, "How much music do you have to know to play a cymbal?" And the guy said, "Well, you don't have to know a lot, but you do have to know when." It's all about timing, folks. All about timing. And since this passage is about God's timing, the key questions is, how do I properly discern what season it is for which activity? So let me suggest 3 ways you can see that. First, through observation. You look around and ask yourself, what is God up to right now? Where's God at? Second, through reflection. You ask yourself, what does what God is doing have to do with me? And then third, consecration, where you ask, am I willing to do whatever he chooses for me to do? I think of the children of Israel. They're about to cross over into Canaan, but the spies come back from their reconnaissance. And remember what the report was? 10 said no and 2 said go. God said, well, if you don't go, you're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and then you're going to die having never seen the land of promise. God said go, but the people said no. However, when they heard the severity of his punishment, they said, oh, we changed our mind. We'll go. But when they did, they were soundly defeated. What's up with that? Well, even though God said go, they said no. They changed their mind, decided to go, but by then God had said no. That's a fascinating story. Solomon is telling us that God has predetermined seasons that we must also experience. And he's telling us that it is essential that we learn how to discern God's seasons so that we can properly respond to them. The trouble is, if you're not in tune with God's timing, or if you say no when God says go, do you know what's going to happen? He's going to close up shop on you, and then he's going to move on. Now, if it's true, what Solomon says, that God really is the one who's in control, to the point that he determines everything I face and even how I should respond to whatever I face. If I'm just a puppet on a string, why even bother? Why not just sit back and let the world spin by? That's Solomon's question. What do workers gain from their toil? In other words, what is the point? He's stunned. He's shocked by the reality that his whole life has been determined by another. And he says, what a burden God has placed on the human race. But that's when God turns on the light, and a burst of divine insight floods Solomon's soul. And he realizes, do you see this verse, that in the end, God has made everything beautiful in its time. You talk about a surprising turn of events. Suddenly God comes on the scene, and when he does, Solomon's focus is immediately transformed. He lifts his eyes beyond the things that he can see, and he catches a glimpse of life above the sun. And he says, I don't understand how God does it, and I don't know why he does what he does. All I know is whatever God chooses for me, and whatever he decides to put me through, in his good time and in his perfect way, he will make it all good. Everything good. When I was in my late 40s, I was convinced that I was going to retire back in Indiana. My kids were born and raised there, and I had pastored a tiny little congregation into the largest Christian church in the state. And so my last 20 years, folk, going to be smooth sailing. But then out of nowhere, God summoned me to Phoenix. Talk about a heart-wrenching move. Now, I left my 2 daughters behind. Andrea was 22 and pretty much launched. Jessica was heading off to Purdue, and yet when our U-Hauls pulled out that night, it was the hardest thing I had ever done. Now, there have been many confirmations over the last 20 years that this move was the right move, but none more personal than this one. You see, God knew just how sorry my kidneys were. And so he brought me to within a 30-minute drive of the premier kidney transplant operation in the whole wide world. I didn't know that. I mean, how could I know that? But he knew. One of the real joys of this move was the excitement of a brand new adventure with my brand new wife, as together we blended our brand new family. But then, not long after we moved, God decided it was time for Cindy to die. How do you make sense of that? What possible good can come from that? It took years before I could see anything good, but can I share with you just one slice of the good I've only recently observed? When Cindy passed, Josh and Andrea were back in Indiana, and Jess was down in Biltmore. But Jess first, and then Josh not long after, moved back in with their old man, just to make sure I'd be okay. And I was so blessed by their selflessness. Although, looking back, there was a beautiful little blonde living down in Mesa, so I'm thinking maybe Kristen played a tiny part in Josh's move. But it gets better. Josh, as he often makes so crystal clear to us, was not a fan of the church. And so at first, although he was here, he kept his distance. Then one summer, our youth group needed a sponsor to take them to CIY. Nobody stepped up. So Josh volunteered. And then he kept serving as a youth coach long after camp was over. Then he became our church's first intern. And then for almost 10 years, he served as our youth pastor. And now he is our lead pastor. But if you trace the thread, the story began in the darkness of death. Truly, God's ways are above our ways, and his thoughts are above our thoughts. What I'm trying to tell you is even what we cannot understand, we can still learn to accept. And that's what we must do. In order to live our lives God's way, we must embrace God's promise that he's going to use every experience we face, every encounter, every single event of our lives, everything God uses to accomplish in me his ultimate good. We absolutely must believe that God is going to make everything beautiful in its time, in his time. The problem is you and I tend to get so focused on the wrong things. And we get stuck essentially on the human side of our experiences to the point we're unable to see, much less comprehend, how this thing we see as awful could ever be transformed into beautiful. Trust me, decades later, and there are still things that have happened in my life that I'm still waiting for God to make beautiful. Is there anybody else in that same space? There's no rhyme, there's no reason, no explanation that can in any way make the pain I feel make sense. It's like I'm looking at the back side of a beautiful tapestry, and all I can see are the ugly knots, the frayed threads, the dangling pieces, and I think, what's the beauty in that? But Solomon is saying, Steve, you're looking at the wrong side of the cloth. And that's okay, because that's all I want you to see right now. But in this in-between time, I want you to learn to trust me. I talked with a family just this week. They're going through some really rugged stuff. And after listening to them unpack their garbage, I said, guys, bottom line, you got to trust. It's not time for all the dangling threads to make sense, at least not yet. It's too early to see the beauty that this mess will one day reveal. You see, you're trapped on the wrong side of the cloth. And so for now, the answer is trust. Trust the God who resides above eternity and who will make everything, even this thing, beautiful in its time. But Steve, how long is it going to take? I mean, I'm losing my grip. I'm not sure I can hold on till beautiful finally gets here. Well, you see, that's another amazing thing God does for us. I want you to look at verse 11. It says, God has also set eternity in the hearts of men. In other words, God has given each one of us a glimpse of the other side. He's given us the ability to see not only what life used to be back in the garden, he's also given us the ability to see a slice of tomorrow as well, and to know deep within our souls that there is something more than just what I can see right now. God didn't give the animals that eternal look. In fact, there's an old Yiddish proverb. It says, to a worm in horseradish, the whole world is horseradish. That's how it is for an animal, right? It's like our dog Charlie. She chases her tail. Idiot. You'd think by now she'd be bored of it, or figure out she's never going to catch it, or she might not like it if she does catch it. But see, God didn't put eternity in Charlie's heart, but he did give it to me. And so I yearn for more. Sometimes these days it feels like I spend half my life sitting in a dialysis chair. And I long, trust me, I long for the day when that ordeal is over. When I cry, I cling to God's promise that one day I'll never weep again. When I get stuck in my past failures, and there are many, I yearn for a time when my sin will haunt me no more. But meanwhile, as I wait for that day, God's gift of eternity in my heart It serves as an internal compass to help me find life's true north. And what I mean by that is in the seasons when I can't seem to fathom what God is up to, his gift of eternity helps me hold on until the beautiful arrives. And God has promised. He said, I will make everything beautiful in its time. And so in the in-between time, in those anguished and heartbroken times, you and I must tap into that gift of eternity so that we can find strength even when we are weary. See what we cannot do. What I, as your pastor, one of your pastors, cannot do is explain my life to you or explain your life to you. I can't even fathom in my own heart what God is up to. But in those dark moments, when my heart, like yours, knows fear and dread, anxiety, I can still hear the song of eternity as God gently speaks to my heart, Steve, there's more. And it is a far greater place. A day is coming, Steve, and all the junk of your life is going to be made beautiful. And as long as I can hear him sing that song, as long as I can hear the beautiful melodies of eternity, I can hold on, and I will. People, that's essentially the message of Solomon today. We've got this eternal, colossal God who sits above eternity, past, present, and future. He's control of it all, but he has a list of hand-selected ingredients he's mixing into your life in this place, at this time, and for this season, and his purpose in doing that. It will not be thwarted. God's purpose in you, it will be done. It's true, fellow believer. There really is a time and a season for everything. And those times and seasons, they just don't blow in your life by happenstance. They're chosen for you by an almighty, all-seeing, ever-loving God. And he's got it. Your life is in the hands of an awesome God who loves to take the dangling threads and the ugly knots and then shape all of that mess into a beautiful tapestry filled with dazzling colors and shapes and textures, resulting in a breathtaking beauty of the story of you, what you never could have accomplished on your own. And in the in-between time, just trust. Just trust him. Because he's got it. Would you bow with me, please? I invite you